Pacifica. This is Democracy Now! We're on the road in Seattle, Washington.
No effort will be spared to bring justice to the victims and hold the perpetrators accountable to the full limit of the law.
Filipino President Gloria Arroyo declares a state of emergency after a massacre leaves 57 people dead, including 18 journalists. We'll go to Manila to speak with the Filipino member of Parliament, Walden Bello. Then the Obama administration decides not to sign an international convention banning landmines.
We made our policy review, and we determined that we would not be able to meet our national defense needs, nor our security commitments to our friends and allies if we sign this convention.
We'll speak with Stephen Goose, co-founder of the international campaign to ban landmines that was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Then, as federal officials launch an investigation into a radiation leak at 3 Mile Island, we'll speak with journalist Christian Parenti about the country's zombie nuke plants. And finally, Coffee Strong. We'll talk to 2 Iraq War veterans who run a GI coffee house just outside of Fort Lewis, the sprawling Army base right here in Washington State. They offer GI counseling, anti-war meetings, and more. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. A group of leading scientists is warning global warming is happening at a faster rate than previously thought. In a new report, 26 experts say global sea levels could rise up to 6.5 feet by the year 2100. The group writes, quote, climate change is accelerating beyond expectations. Many of its members were part of the UN's Nobel-winning Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which has argued nations to cap emissions. The warning comes less than 2 weeks before world leaders gather in Copenhagen to negotiate a climate treaty. A new poll, meanwhile, shows the number of Americans who believe global warming is happening has declined. The Washington Post ABC News survey says 72% of Americans believe global warming is real, down from 80%. A majority, however, continue to support imposing a national cap on greenhouse gas emissions. The Obama administration's announced it won't sign an international convention banning landmines. On Tuesday, a State Department spokesman announced the White House has decided against changing the U.S. stance following a review. This is the first time the Obama administration has publicly disclosed its position on the Mine Ban Treaty, which bans the use, stockpiling, production, or transfer of anti-personnel mines. A review conference is being held in Colombia beginning on Sunday. We'll have more on that story later in the broadcast. Administration officials say President Obama will unveil his decision on sending tens of thousands of additional troops to Afghanistan next week. Obama is expected to announce the plan in a primetime address next Tuesday night. At the White House, Obama said he intends to finish the job in Afghanistan.
I've also indicated that after 8 years, some of those years in which we did not have, I think, either the resources or the strategy to get the job done, it is my intention to finish the job. And I feel very confident that when the American people hear a clear rationale for what we're doing there and how we intend to achieve our goals, that they will be supportive.
The announcement's expected to coincide with congressional appearances by the top U.S. military commander in Afghanistan, General Stanley McChrystal, and the U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan, Carl Eikenberry. As President Obama prepares to escalate the Afghan occupation, new figures are calling into question U.S. claims about the readiness of Afghan forces. The Interpress Service news agency is reporting 1 in every 4 soldiers left the Afghan National Army during the year ending in September. Pentagon figures show the Afghan turnover rate is rising instead of slowing down. President Obama hosted the Indian Prime Minister, Manmohan Singh, at the White House on Tuesday. The two pledged to move ahead on the U.S.-Indian nuclear deal. Outside the White House, hundreds of people gathered to protest the Indian occupation of Kashmir.
We are conveying message to the President Obama that he pay attention on Kashmir. We are suffering since last 62 years in the Kashmir. Kashmir is occupied by 3 countries, India, China, and Pakistan. We need freedom. We need the involvement of the United Nations, world community, and especially U.S. President, United States.
A top Obama administration official involved in closing Guantanamo prison has resigned. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Detainee Policy, Philip Carter, has been responsible for overseeing U.S. policy on prisoners seized abroad. His resignation follows the departure of another top figure in the push to close Guantanamo, White House counsel Gregory Craig. The Federal Reserve is warning it expects a high unemployment rate over the next several years. On Tuesday, a Fed report said unemployment will remain well above the 5% benchmark through 2012. Another report, meanwhile, downgraded previous estimates of national economic growth in the third quarter from 3.5% to 2.8%. New figures, meanwhile, show bank lending continues to decline. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation says lending fell 2.8% in the third quarter, the largest drop in at least 25 years. Japan is preparing to investigate a decades-old secret agreement that's allowed the U.S. to transport nuclear weapons on Japanese territory. The deal dates back to the 60s. Successive Japanese governments have long denied reports of the pact because it violates a national law barring the storage or production of nuclear weapons. The move could further strain relations between the U.S. and Japan. The governing Democratic Party of Japan was elected in August on a platform that included revisiting Japanese-U.S. military ties. In Britain, a hearing into Britain's involvement in the Iraq War opened on Tuesday with testimony that the drumbeat for war predated the 9/11 attacks. British officials said they began hearing of U.S. plans to invade Iraq nearly 2 years before the March 2003 invasion. The head of the inquiry, Sir John Chilcot, said the panel would be unsparing in its criticisms.
No one's on trial here. We cannot determine guilt or innocence. Only courts can do that. But I make a commitment here that once we get to our final report, we will not shy away from making criticisms either of institutions or processes or individuals where they are truly warranted.
At The Hague, a war crimes trial against 2 Congolese warlords has begun. Germain Katanga and Mathieu Chui are accused of directing a February 2003 attack on a village in the Democratic Republic of Congo's Ituri region. It's the court's second case after the Congolese warlord Thomas Lubanga went on trial earlier this year. And in New York, state officials and developers behind a massive stadium project have won a key legal victory to seize private property from Brooklyn residents. On Tuesday, the Court of Appeals said the state can use eminent domain to seize land planned for the $4.9 billion Atlantic Yards project. Opponents of eminent domain have argued it's unconstitutional, and lawmakers have faced calls to curb its use. The group Develop, Don't Destroy Brooklyn says it plans to continue its campaign against the proposed stadium. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm